Everybody, thank you so much for being here. This is, I think, the 7th week of the conference, and so there is not many people here, but the ones that are still here, thank you so much for coming. And we are very happy to see old faces, friends, comrades that we haven't seen probably since 5 years ago. So it's really good to be with you here today. As usual, time is against us. And we have actually 2 sets of discussions. So we are going to have panel 1 with domestic workers leaders representing Caribbean, the United States, Latin America, and Asia. And then the second panel is going to be a panel of Global Union Federations, Solidarity Center, and other allied movements like the street workers movement and the garment workers. So in the first panel, we are going to be very lucky to hear from the women and the leaders that are at the front line of working on care. And not only working on care, but really trying to engage with their governments to talk about national care policies, since this is the year of care in a post-pandemic climate. So we really wanted to put this panel here at the CSW because our movement, the Global Domestic Workers Movement, as a global movement came together 15 years ago. However, the grassroots organizing of domestic workers, it easily traces back to 100 years ago. And the first slogan and the premise and the principle of this movement is that domestic work is actual work, and that domestic workers are actual workers. That was not understood before, but this is what paved the way to have an international instrument to have recognized domestic workers in the big house of labor, the International Labor Organization, and that also helped to pave the way to address other issues such as gender-based violence. And then we had C-190 after a few years after C-189. And today we are talking about the care economy and how essential it is. Everybody is connected through care, through the whole life of a cycle of life, since we are babies until the moment we die. So we are all connected to care, and we all have seen during the pandemic how essential this is, and we cannot survive. But not only societies and reproduction of societies, but also the national economies and the global economy. However, the big contradiction that was exposed also during the pandemic is that care workers and domestic workers are not actually valued and recognized, and they are not enjoying the same working and rights, labor rights, that any other workers in other occupations. So it is one of the sectors where there is a gender pay gap and other social, racial, class inequalities, that if we do not address that, we cannot be thinking on how to overcome and alleviate poverty and gender. So our panel today is, as I said, our domestic regions, and I'm going to start by asking them a question. It's a little bit like a 3 little questions for each one of you, and I want to start by first introducing to them. Here we have Shirley Price, our historic founding leader from the Jamaican Household Workers Unions, and an organization that helped to create IDWF back in 2013. So Shirley Price, welcome. Thank you for being here with us. Thank you for having me. We have Yesenia de Casaus. She is an organizer from the UDW, United Domestic Workers in California. She's going to introduce, but they basically have, the membership is made up of home-based workers and also home care workers and child care workers. Then we have June Barrett. She is a leader organizer from the National Domestic Workers Alliance here in the United States, and she's also the vice president of IDWF. We have Carmen Brites. She is a leader organizer in Argentina, and she's also the president of IDWF. And we have Sonia George, leader organizer in India with SEWA, the domestic workers, and she is the Executive Committee Asia representative for the IDWF. So a big round of applause for our leaders. Thank you so much. So we are going to have 5 minutes to respond a question, to talk and to share with us about the care conditions in your country. Let's start with Shirley. It's going to be the same question for all of you. So Shirley, in the Caribbean region, who does care work and what type of care? And in the last years, have you seen any efforts done by the governments in your region to address the care crisis? And these initiatives and efforts are including enough or not to domestic workers?
Good afternoon, everyone. Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. Domestic work is the oldest profession for a very long time and provides care work, direct and indirect, paid and unpaid. We cook, we clean, we take care of the children, the elderly, the sick, disabled, mothers, fathers, all. We take care of all. So it is only profession that does it all as a care worker. Doctor may do this, nurses may do this. When it comes to domestic worker, we have done it all. We are the doctors, we are the nurses, we are teachers, we are the engineers, counselors. Yet, our contribution to the care economy remains undervalued, unrecognized, and not respected. In 2004, why are we still fighting to be included in care economy, to be included in policies, to be included in things that should be provided to us, should be for us? You know, we are fighting for everything as domestic worker. And I'm saying time comes now for us to stop. We are going to be demanding what is rightfully ours, and that is protection for us as domestic workers. It is essential for promoting gender equality. Domestic work is not just work, but it's real work, and we should be treated with respect, equality, and dignity. In the Caribbean, even though we have all the laws that protect domestic workers in most of our islands, we do not have a comprehensive care policy. We are, however, looking at the gaps and to see where to plug it in terms of the care and care policy. We're pushing for the care agenda. We're pushing the care agenda forward, and so care can be and the national discussion of the government across the Caribbean. We have to change the narrative. Even here at CSW, you know, when I attend a lot of the sessions, the peer sessions, and it's like domestic worker not included. And I have to be saying, a domestic worker is in the room, we are included. Domestic workers should be part of the care economy. We should be more focused. And we're talking about care economy, you know, because we want domestic worker to be included, and we want investment, the government to be investing in care. And this is what we're pushing across the Caribbean, that we want domestic worker to be included, and we want investment, and that's what we are fighting for. But I can share an example for one of our domestic workers that left her children and went to work. And on her way back from work in the evening, she was called to say that her child drowned in a pool, you know, and the road. And we are pushing for quality and affordable childcare. And that's why we, at the International Domestic Workers Federation, one of our resolutions that we put on the table in 2018 is quality childcare. And thank God, this year at our Congress, last year, it was again on the agenda to say we should have quality childcare. So in Jamaica and across the Caribbean region, we are pushing to be on the care agenda, to be inclusive, and for it to be on the government lips, and not just care with decent work. That's what we are pushing for. And to invest in care, you know, and to be at all the table. We don't want to be at some table, we want to be at all the table, because we're saying nothing for us. Without us, all the plans should be inclusive. And care is the cornerstone for a just and sustainable economy. So a collective voice bring collective action, and a collective action will bring collective change. And this is what we're fighting for across the Caribbean. Nothing for us without us. We need a care with decent work for all of us, not just for some. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Shirley. And that was even below 5 minutes. You know, the trade union is very, that is very good. Thank you so much. Thank you also for reminding us, Shirley, that in our IDWF Congress, it is the second time that there is a very comprehensive resolution on care that looks at the dimensions of the labor rights of the care providers, but also to the care needs of the caregivers. Domestic workers are unpaid care workers as well. And so childcare, elderly care for domestic workers is a must. Yesenia, let's go with you in California.
Okay, thank you, Adriana, and everyone. Again, my name is Yesenia de Casaus. And I'm here representing the United Domestic Workers. We are a labor union that represents over 170,000 care workers in California who take care of children, elderly, and people with disabilities. The majority are women, and a large number of us are immigrants, like me. I am originally from Mexico. UDW is a very large local of AFSCME, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, and a member of the FAL-CIO. And it is because unions like us that our type of work has been having more of a presence in organized labor. But I wanted to talk about what's all the work that we still need to do. I want to remind everyone, this type of work, domestic work, caregiving, as even when considered workers in the United States, our workers were excluded from the Fair Labor Standards Act. That's something that has affected our membership up to a few years ago when that exclusion was removed and we were able to obtain things like overtime that other US workers had all the time and we didn't. Just recently, we had to, in California, a state in the United States where you would think, well, you know, workers have a lot of rights. We had to fight for access to sick time pay that everyone else was given through you asked about policies, right? So a policy that was passed to give access to Californians. Every Californian had access, but our type of worker was excluded, carved out of that. So that's something like a constant theme, a constant struggle for us. We still have no access to vacation or retirement security. So as a labor union, those are the type of things that we're constantly fighting for. Particularly for a lot of our members who take care of a family member, an immediate family member, they continue to not consider workers in a lot of the state and federal programs. So that's something that we're always trying to work on and trying to change those laws and just remind everybody that we're workers, and like my sister and everyone else has been saying, we deserve the same protections and the same treatment as everyone else. We constantly struggle we understand that, you know, we have to be respected for the important work that we do. We also understand the root of the problem. I mentioned, most of us are women, most of us are immigrants to the United States, people of color. And so we are not just a labor union, we are a social justice union. That's what we call ourselves, and we engage in alliances such as the National Domestic Worker Alliance, and we're part of the IDWF. Being in the international conversation and a national conversation about these type of themes and talk about workers, what's a worker, and say we are workers and we are doing a very valuable work. So being in the labor movement in the United States, we are trying to amplify the message, but also demand action. And that's where we have approached not just, states like California or where we're at right now in New York, but also national policy that allows for more investments. Like Shirley said, we demand that investments be made in care work because it affects everyone. And also remember that the caretakers also need to be cared for.
Thank you so much, Yesenia. And now let's go with June, also from the United States National Domestic Workers Alliance.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here. As Adrian said, my name is June Barrett, and I am a domestic worker. I wear many hats, but when I leave here, I'm going straight back to my work as a care worker. I am a professional care worker, and I work in different sectors of domestic work. And I've been working as a domestic worker since the age of 14. I worked in Jamaica as a domestic worker in the UK, and left that, and then came back to the US as an immigrant, and I went back into my roots, I like to say, as a domestic worker. I'm going to give a little bit of historical context, as I heard my sister speaking around domestic work, and then it will kind of ground you into understanding why we're here to talk about care. So in the 1930s, when the labor laws were being passed, domestic workers and farm workers were excluded. And until today, domestic workers really do not have covered under most labor laws. And also, we are fighting, the National Domestic Workers Alliance is fighting for a federal domestic Bill of Rights that will cover all domestic workers across the United States. So as a care worker, people like to say that it's not real work, but I want to tell you that it is real work, and that it is the work that makes other work possible. My work as a care worker enables family members to go to work, knowing that their elderly parents, their disabled loved ones, their little babies, their children are in safe and reliable hands. Care is essential in every community across the globe. And at some point in our lives, we are going to be needing care. And another thing, the pandemic has really like opened the eyes, not just nationally, but globally, as to why domestic workers are so essential. Because here in the United States, when everyone was sitting at their homes during the pandemic, talking about the Zoom fatigue, domestic workers were on the buses and the train, going to take care of their families, risking their lives. Many of them died, and many of the domestic workers took the virus back to their homes and infected their loved ones. So in fact, it was domestic workers and farm workers who was on the front line during the pandemic. And that is why we are saying that we need to make care a priority. Not only that, but it is really a pleasure to see a domestic worker in this space sitting at the table because at the beginning of the conversation, we were left out. So it's really powerful for me to see us here. So the National Domestic Workers Alliance has been on the front line fighting for care forever, long before it became a global conversation. So our movement, we made it from the playgrounds of New York City to the president's desk. And many of you know that last year, the president signed an executive order declaring April as Caregivers Recognition Month. To celebrate the contributions of care worker, the heart and the engine of our society. We are the backbone, because without us, who is going to take care of the children? Who is going to make sure that your elderly loved ones stay in their homes? Who is going to make sure that your little babies are cared for? Care workers. Okay, so the need for affordable care service has never been more clear. We are still in a care crisis. As I said, the pandemic has shown us that an already crumbling care system, and that we need a safety net. And the need for care in the country is only growing. The care force is rapidly increasing as our families grow and age. Still, the workforce faces unprecedented challenges: low pay, long hours, lack of benefit, and unpaid labor. As my sister pointed out, that it's paid and unpaid labor. And that needs to change. The White House has taken a tremendous step toward celebrating and recognizing the power of caregivers, both as professionals and humans. And we are proud to celebrate the second Care Workers Recognition Month coming up in April. Yeah. Okay, Joanna. So, yeah, so, yeah. Yeah, so we're about to go back to DC to celebrate another year of the recognition of the Caregivers Month. So this April is a time for the rest of the country to see what we see. It's time we recognize care work and thank care workers and value the critical work they do. So the National Domestic Workers Alliance and partners, as my sister spoke about, plan to hold multiple events around the country in April, and to put a national spotlight on the millions of Black, Brown, Latinx, Indigenous, AAPI, and migrant care workers and domestic workers who are the backbone. We are the backbone of society. If we decided to have a national strike, society, I'm telling you, would fall apart. And do I still have some time?
No.
Do I still have some time? No, I'm done.
Thank you, June, and thank you, Yesenia and June, for bringing the dimension of migrant domestic work. And so April, stay tuned, the people that live in the United States, there is a big action following the executive order done by Biden, and this is huge. And a reminder that there are 71% of migrant domestic workers in the United States that provide this care for this economy. Thank you so much. Now we go to Latin America.
Wow. Bueno, yo voy a tratar de ser lo más breve posible porque me tienen que hacer también la interpretación. Creo que cada una de mis compañeras y colegas que han hablado en este panel, en todas nuestras regiones sufrimos la misma situación, las trabajadoras del hogar, ¿no? Enfrentamos importantes déficits que tienen que ver con el trabajo decente, que tienen que ver con la exclusión de las leyes laborales, y a pesar de que en muchos países de Latinoamérica hay leyes que dan protección a las trabajadoras del hogar, seguimos siendo un trabajo invisible, informal y no reconocidas como trabajadoras del hogar como cualquier otro trabajador. También debo decir que a nivel mundial, la mitad de las trabajadoras del hogar no disfrutan los derechos igualitarios que tiene cualquier otro trabajador. una falta importantísima de reconocimiento formal del trabajo doméstico como trabajo, y esto tiene raíces en las nociones de género, ¿no? Esto que devalúan el trabajo de las mujeres y da como resultado que el trabajo doméstico tenga algunas condiciones laborales más pobres del mercado. Inclusive muchos países de nosotros de Latinoamérica tienen el salario mínimo vital y móvil diferenciado a los salarios mínimo vital y móviles de los otros sectores. Entonces para nosotros es importante esto de el reconocimiento del trabajo igualitario como cualquier otro trabajador de las trabajadoras del hogar. Principalmente porque tenemos muchísimas veces bajos salarios, el tema del horario, el tema del uso del tiempo, donde nosotros no podemos tener un autocuidado personal de nuestro trabajo. Estamos trabajando en una casa de familia donde hay un empleador y un trabajador, esto no es una empresa. Mayormente nos confunden como trabajadoras de su familia o que somos la persona, ni siquiera nos nombran como trabajador, sino es la persona que me ayuda, es la persona que queremos como la familia, y eso hace que no se identifique como empleador, el propio empleador, y nosotras, las trabajadoras del hogar, como trabajadoras. Acá creo que hay puntos esenciales que nosotros queremos adoptar. Desde la Federación también en nuestros congresos hemos trabajado puntos importantes, como el tema de los cuidados, el tema de la migración, el tema de la ratificación del convenio 189, el tema de violencia y género, del convenio 190, el tema de la LGTBIQ+, que para nosotros es muy importante, es la inserción de nuestros compañeros y compañeras que están en ese sector trabajando también en el trabajo doméstico. En Nicaragua tenemos un sindicato que son de trabajadoras trans, compañeras que luchan todos los días por el reconocimiento no solamente de los derechos laborales, sino también de otro tipo de derechos. Como saben ustedes, la ratificación del convenio 189, en Latinoamérica llevamos más de 18 ratificaciones y estamos avanzando y trabajando para la visibilización del trabajo doméstico en Guatemala, en El Salvador y Honduras, 3 países que Latinoamérica le falta para esa ratificación del 189 y que estamos empujando desde nuestra Federación Mundial para que se logre esa ratificación. Sabemos que hay una cuestión política, que muchas veces estas ratificaciones o estas leyes tienen que ver con el movimiento político del país, pero nosotros como federación vamos a hacer todo lo posible para que estos 3 países ratifiquen este convenio y Latinoamérica termine de ratificar. También seguimos trabajando en el tema de la implementación, porque ¿qué nos sirve tener un convenio ratificado si no se implementa? Son normas muertas, por lo cual nosotros queremos avanzar en el tema de la implementación. Otro gran tema es reconocer el trabajo del hogar como un trabajo del cuidado remunerado y, como dijeron mis compañeras, no remunerados. ¿Por qué digo no remunerados? Nosotros hacemos el mismo trabajo que hacemos en ese espacio laboral que tenemos de esa casa de familia, lo seguimos haciendo dentro de nuestros hogares, cuidando. ¿Quién nos cuida a nuestra familia? ¿Quién nos cuida a nuestros adultos mayores? ¿Quién nos cuida a nuestros niños y niñas y adolescentes? No tenemos la posición económica para poder tener una trabajadora del hogar que nos ayude a nosotras, las propias trabajadoras. Entonces acá es donde tenemos que impulsar que los gobiernos pongan en agenda acciones de políticas públicas que vean las necesidades que tienen las trabajadoras del hogar para que ellos sean responsables, porque los gobiernos son responsables de los beneficios, de las necesidades que tenemos este sector como trabajadoras de cuidado. Entonces vamos a seguir impulsando que en cada uno de nuestros países, de nuestro gobierno, no solamente de Latinoamérica, sino de todas las regiones que representamos en la federación, estemos en agenda como trabajadoras de cuidado, trabajadoras remuneradas y no remuneradas, con el tema del uso del tiempo, porque ¿en qué momento nosotros tenemos recreación? ¿En qué momento nosotros podemos brindarle a nuestra familia también esto que nosotros le brindamos, este servicio que le brindamos a los empleadores, donde ellos pueden relacionarse con su familia, donde ellos pueden profesionalizar, seguir trabajando, seguir haciendo su vida externa, y nosotros cuidamos de su familia y de sus hogares? Bien. Y principalmente también, y acá voy a terminar, es garantizar los derechos de las compañeras migrantes en cada uno de nuestros países. Tenemos que tener una ley de leyes migratorias en nuestros países que identifiquen al trabajo doméstico en forma igualitaria en las compañeras nacionales inmigrantes. Tienen los mismos derechos, hacen el mismo trabajo, son personas y son cuidadores de nuestras propias familias. Así que realmente las trabajadoras migrantes necesitan que nosotras estemos ahí respaldando a las compañeras en que tengan derechos igualitarios como cualquier otro trabajador de ese país. En Latinoamérica hay muchos avances, como por ejemplo Colombia, República Dominicana, México, Perú, países que vamos creciendo cada vez más, pero que falta mucho. ¿Y cuál es esto que falta? Es el reconocimiento del trabajo doméstico como trabajo y que la sociedad entera reconozca que somos trabajadoras y que ellos son nuestros empleadores. Muchas gracias.
Translating for President Carmen Brites, domestic workers across Latin America face significant deficits for decent work. They're excluded from labor and social security laws. They lack access to living wages, and there is often weak implementation and enforcement of the laws that do protect domestic workers. And much of this is due to the historic devaluation of women's work. Women's work has been devalued across our countries, and very often women are in the poorest working conditions in the labor market, which include long hours, low wages, low or non-payment of wages, exposure to violence and harassment, and a lack of the free time that would allow workers to have self-care, as well as exposure to unsafe working conditions and lack of occupational safety and health protections. To achieve the demands of domestic workers, it's essential to adopt policies that consider, number one, not only the ratification, but the implementation of Convention 189 of the International Labor Organization on decent work for domestic workers. Across the Americas, 18 countries have ratified Convention 189. We are fighting very hard for Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala to ratify, but even more so than this, we are fighting for implementation in the countries that have ratified it, because otherwise it is a dead law that does nothing to actually enforce domestic worker rights. It is vital to recognize domestic workers as part of not only the paid care workforce, but the unpaid care workforce, because we do this work for our employers and then we go home and do it unpaid for our own families. And because of this, domestic workers need to be a key voice when governments are considering care policies. Domestic workers need to be part of social dialogue, as do domestic worker employers. And we must guarantee the labor rights and social protection of migrant domestic workers. We have to ensure the rights of LGBTI domestic workers who are part of the domestic workforce and part of the membership of the IDWF, including trans domestic workers in Nicaragua. Thank you.
Wow, Alexis, that was brilliant. Oh, let's go to Asia, Victoria George.
Thank you, Adriana, and I know it's a very Herculean task to share the entire Asia within 5 minutes, but I'll try my best. And so as following the discussions with my colleagues, I think to discuss about care, it's a very complex process, especially in the context of the global South, because I think majority of the local and migrant caregivers represent the global South, and it's one of the difficult things that we face in terms of addressing care from the perspective of the most marginalized workforces in the region. That is the first thing that I would like to say. And when it comes to policies and policy mapping, IDWF, as part of the International Domestic Workers Federation's Asia region, we have been doing certain basic researches, and we have finished a first round of care policy mapping in 8 countries in Asia, and it included all the regions of Asia, and those mappings and those researches have given us some interesting data to take the debate on care forward in that sense, because what we have understood in those areas that we have been conducting researches is that public care policies are very weak in all these regions, in most of the regions. So means number of people who can really depend on public care policies, it is very few, and most of them are from the upper class or affluent communities of the society. And and they can afford such kind of measures. And when it comes to the people of the different class and intersections of different differences that is existing in the society, I think one even not even 1% are covered in that of the public care policies. And also when you go to the middle class families, public care policies are not accessible. They don't have in most of the countries. And what is happening is that people really want individual care, private care at home. And that is actually, they need. That is where, the issue of domestic workers as care workers is coming in the researches that we have conducted. And that is where there are a lot of conditions that, when you go to a private house as a care worker in different situations, means it's not direct care, it could be indirect care. So it's a mixture of direct and indirect care. And when it comes to those, the conditions of decent work has at that shared by other colleagues, it is the same thing that has been existing, because most of these care policies, they don't talk about domestic work as care work. So that is one of the biggest challenges that we face in these countries, because even when you talk about frontline workers, when you talk about health workers, they are considered in the care economy and care discussions, but domestic workers are completely out, where they perform all kinds of care work, including healthcare within the household. So according to Convention 189 definitions, all of them are included as domestic workers, but that equation of domestic work and care work has some missing components when it comes to defining policies. So that is something that we have to take care of. And that is where the entire discussions on care economy should be focused from the perspective of domestic workers. And the second thing is, when it comes to access to care for these workers, who are the caregivers, that is the second issue, that majority of the workers have no such access to any care facilities within their region, within their country. They are not covered in the policies. For example, we talked about maternity rights. Majority of the workers are out of any such kinds of protection. And childcare, majority of even though there are childcare facilities existing in some of the countries, but for example, domestic workers are not able to access, because the time that they really put towards their care work, their work does not matches with the time of care that the state is providing. So that contradiction will lead them not to use care from the public systems, and they are again dependent on the unpaid family work within their home, to look after their children and other care needs of the family. So that is something that has come up as part of our research, that what are the care needs of the caregivers and how the state should protect their care needs. And when it comes to young caregivers, that is again more complex, because in some countries there's a huge gap between the people who are young and people who are middle-aged in the process of care workers. So how do we address especially in the context of addressing female employment situations and inclusion in the labor force participation of women workers in the region? This care policies really matters in terms of accessing care to the workers. Yeah. So that is something that we have to really think about. And the third thing is migrant workers. When they leave the country, leaving the entire family in terms of care work, neither of these questions are addressed in terms of addressing their own care needs, their children's needs, and the kind of social integration and reintegration possible in terms of migrant workers, who really leaving their families and going abroad. And most of the countries that we have found in the research is that all these people are from the lower class and caste positions of the country, and means people from the vulnerable communities are forced to migrate, and no such care needs are taken either by the state, by the communities, or by religious institutions. Of none of those social institutions are able to look at those things from a care perspective of the workers. So I think these are some of the few things that I would like to highlight in terms of understanding care and the lack of care policies or the limitations of care policies from a nation perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, wonderful leaders of my federation. I think it is very clear that when we talk about the organization of care and communities of care, We cannot think on truly sounded care systems if we do not bring back to the table centering decent work for domestic workers and for all the rest of care workers. What we want is decent care that provides pathways to formalization, so we equalize the rights of the domestic workers. As C189 says, domestic workers should not be regarded or should be regarded as same as any other worker. This is like simply justice that is overdue. With that, I thank you all, and I will call to the next panelist. So I'm gonna call Marina Durano, Nadia, Veronica, Lorraine, and Alexis.
Yeah.
Is the microphone working? Thank you so much. I call this the panel of our allies, our sisters organizations, because if we do not look at care as a very interconnected and intersectoral and intersectional problem, we are not going to address the needs for labor rights and also the needs of care for the society. So I thank you so much, sisters, for coming here. Veronica Montúfar is a gender specialist of international public international service, ESP. I mix up the Spanish with English.
You look at me and you
Is that your
start
title?
Equalities
Equality.
Officer for Public Services International.
Perfect. So from now on, I'm going to let everyone to say their own title. I'm just going to say your names, okay? Marina Durano from Unicare. Ananya, I always cannot pronounce your Batacharchi, yay, from Asian Floor Wage Alliance. Lorraine, Lorraine Sibanda, I always call you Lorraine only, President of StreetNet International, and Alexis De Simoni from the Solidarity Center. So thank you so much to all these women. We work together, and I'm going to start. You have different questions. So Union PSI, I'm going to ask the same question because we're global union federations working on care. So starting with Veronica. Veronica, what are the key principles to keep in mind when approaching the discussions, advocacy, and organizing for care policies and legislations? What challenges do you anticipate, and what kind of initiatives does your Global Union Federation has taken on the topic of care? 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Adriana, and thank you for the invitation today. I may say that Public Services International is a global union federation that organizes care workers around the world in long-term care, social care, community care, and healthcare sectors. We are a global union that represents 70% of women workers around the world, and we have in our constitution, in our mandate, the mandate to defend workers' rights, public services workers' rights, but as well to defend public services for all. Universal, quality, public services for all. That's why in 2020, PSI decided to change the course and discourse on care and move from the approach focused in the care economy to the social organization of care. This approach allowed us to have a more comprehensive line to care, integrating both the political dimension and also the ethical dimension, not only the economic
dimensions. As well, this shift permitted us to build a care manifesto. And with the global feminist tax justice and human rights movement, in 2021, we jointly called for rebuilding the social organization of care, because the current social organization of care is unjust and it's unviable. I could say, I could not say, pronounce that word in English. So our care manifesto goes beyond the world of work. Our care manifesto is seeing the political dimensions in the national level, in the regional level, and in the global level. So that's why our 5 Rs, because we in our manifesto call for 5 Rs, these 5 Rs differ a bit from the ILO 5 Rs framework on care work. And this is because, I already said, we see care beyond the world of work. Our 5 Rs recognize, reward, reduce, redistribute, and reclaim include an addition from the ILO framework. And this addition needs to make it clear that we need to recognize care as a human right. So the recognition R includes the recognition of care as a human right, the need to redistribute care, not only among the persons that are part of the household, but also between households and public services, and the need to reclaim the public nature of care and the fundamental responsibility of states in financing, providing, and regulating care systems and public services. So we can see now and proclaim a win, a victory, in at least 3 of these Rs that are a joint dimension with the feminist movement and around the world. And we can say that the 3 Rs that have been recognized I could say in political discourses and in some language in the UN dimensions are dealing with recognize, reduce, and redistribute. At least we think that we have gained this global agreement worldwide. But we need to keep our fight and fight harder to reward care workers. And when we are talking about reward, we are talking about equal pay or work of equal value. We are talking about representation of care workers and unions of representing care workers in the discussion of care and the care systems and everything that deals with care. But also we need to put in the debate the responsibility of states in regulating all actors of the social organization of care, including the private sector. So you were asking about opportunities and challenges. I think that opportunities could be advancing the need to reward care workers, and we have the ILO discussion this year, the general discussion about decent work in the care economy. So that will be a key dimension of an opportunity for rewarding care workers. But also we are seeing that we need to grow our manifesto, and now we are putting forward a roadmap that not only see care in the dimension of the political responsibility of states, but also in a global dimension of well-being feminist economists. Challenges: privatization and financialization of care that considers care a market asset, pushes out women in vulnerable situations, using the tricks of the finance system and using the state as an instrument for increasing private profits by externalization of care services. That's why we have moved the approach from the care economy to the social organization of care, including these other ways of economy, the purple economy, the silver economy. When we hear those kind of things, we say the private sector is there trying to make profits. Two more, gender bonds, because gender bonds link with care and are increasing national debt, public debt of countries. And also, we think that we right now are lacking of unity in the trade union movement, and we need to fight together. United we win, divided we fall. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We can grab the microphone.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Marina Durano, and I am an advisor on the care economy and partnership engagements with the UNI Global Union. For UNI, we organize care workers mostly in the private sector, and that's in recognition of really the trend that we're seeing that basically Veronica has explained about how the public sector has really reneged on its responsibilities. And what has happened is that the private sector is seeing profit opportunities and now entering into the care sector. So let me just start with one fact, really. The fact that there is a worldwide shortage of health and care workers. That's a worldwide shortage. The World Health Organization projected a shortfall of 10 million health workers by 2030. Most of that will be shortfalls in poor countries and lower middle income countries. But that's just the health section. That's not the entirety of the care sector. The International Labour Organization recently has been calling for a doubling of investment in the care economy. If we do that, if we follow this recommendation, the projection is that this will create 269 million new jobs. Well, more than, that will cover far more than the 10 million shortfall. So there is a real benefit clearly to investments in care. Again, I appreciative of Veronica's intervention precisely because it is very clear how we will benefit from that. Now, why is this fact important? It's a significant contributor to poor staffing in facilities and institutions. It's a significant contribution to why we have a poor mix of skills, that is a mix of occupations and different types of skills that can actually deliver quality care. And it's also a reason why you have a very high turnover in the care sector. Nobody wants this job. People are looking for jobs, but the only jobs available are terrible jobs. This is not decent work that we have. So really the policies that need to be implemented have to address fundamentally the shortage, and you will see later on an improvements in other areas once we deal with the shortage. So we are looking also towards policies that revolve around formalization. This is a very important concept. The push, because of the high demand and the low supply, there's a push towards, well, let's figure out something. Let's fix this with a Band-Aid solution. And that means really pushing down the standards of the sector, especially the labor standards. But we are looking for pathways towards formalization with employment contracts reflecting internationally agreed upon labor standards. We want professionalization for all workers that create occupational ladders that make upward social mobility realizable for all care workers. And of course, we want this spaces created for unions to play a role in bringing together freedom of association and the right to collective bargaining as we build the institutions necessary to fulfill all the needs of care that well, globally that we have. So at the start, we should have unions already at the table. We shouldn't wait until the bargaining actually happens. Let's start with the planning, national planning, programming, and budgeting. Again, I laud my comrade here from PSI. PSI has been really good at pushing for public services. Now, it's really the combination of these policies that we can hope to see improvements in pay and working conditions that will help with help us attract and retain workers in this sector. And the approach puts unions in the center of the solution for the health and care shortage, as much as unions being a pathway towards women's empowerment, political power, and economic power. That means reducing also gender equality gaps in care and in general. Now, how will I'd like to illustrate by actually elevating the work of Fena Mutra and the leadership of Ruth Diaz here, because we have a partnership in the Dominican Republic to actually try to craft what could possibly be an example of how to do it right. The Dominican Republic is planning to create communities of care that is built upon its existing cash transfer program and called Superate. And in the process of building these communities of care, there is a pilot program that is put in place, and Ruth Diaz and Fena Mutra is working with the Council for Elderly Persons to provide training and certification to home-based care workers. And that includes not just the training for the occupation, but also training on labor rights and workers' rights. And with that certification, hopefully we will actually be able to provide these care workers with jobs and with employment contracts, and also the possibility of this group creating a union for themselves so that they can bargain for better conditions later on. We think there's a lot of potential here, and it could possibly be a model that could be replicated in other countries in Latin America and the Caribbean or elsewhere. So we're looking forward to working with Ruth and Fena Mutra, and hopefully we can share some good news for you this year or next. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria. Now, I want to talk about alliances building. So this question will go for Ananya, for Lorraine, and for Alexis. So Ananya, we are sister sectors. Ananya is from the garment sector. We are formal workers operating under informal conditions because our sectors have clearly who is an employee and who is a worker. There is a contractual relationship that is not honored most of the times. So what are the views on the care needs of garment workers, and what possibilities of alliances building do you see between these two sectors from human rights dimension to access to care?
Thank you, Adriana, and good afternoon, everybody. I want to say that domestic work is the sector in which I began as a labor organizer. So before I went into garment, actually 20 years ago, I was organizing in the Asian immigrant communities in New York City, and I was organizing domestic workers. And some of that work has gone into the National Domestic Workers Alliance. And I was also present at the IDWF Founding Congress in Uruguay. And I'm so honored that I am able to join you today from the sister sector of garment work, And it's very important to know that these are allied sectors because women workers go in between the two sectors. From garment work, they easily slip into domestic work and so on. So it makes logical sense for us to be allied together. Now, today I am here in solidarity, but I'm also here to see if we can expand and build our movement. As other sisters have pointed out today, including Marina, that we are seeing a growing informality across sectors in which women workers who work in low wage sectors, this is the target sector for informality. And so we need to come together because informality is a feminist issue. It is a gendered issue. And the C190, we have seen even during CSW, and I expect to see it during the year, has a vibration that brings people together. So in a way, we are now in the space of movement building across sectors, and we have to take informality on as an issue which is not particular to any sector, but it is particular to women workers who are deliberately suppressed into low-wage sectors. And let us remember that informality is not accidental. It's not as if, oh, by the way, we have informal workers. It is a deliberate strategy of business and government. So we need to understand it as a strategy of recruitment, of deliberate recruitment and employment of women workers from vulnerable communities. So we have what is called the labor force, the labor market. And from that labor market, we are taking out women workers who are from vulnerable communities and funneling them into certain sectors in order to extract the most quality work with the least cost. And that is a business strategy. That is a government strategy. It is also a strategy for severe disciplining of workers, because when you have informal workers without a recognized or a very weak employer-worker relationship, we are also talking about a space where workers face gender-based violence and harassment and regular violation of labor laws. So really, we are looking at changing informality and changing it to more formal labor standards. In order to do that, we have to understand who is the world of employers. In the garment factories, in the garment industry, the world of employers are the fashion brands. In domestic work, we have to, and we do this in different countries in different ways. The employers have to be identified as a body. Otherwise, who are we negotiating with? It can be the state, but it needs to be also the world of employers. When it comes to migrant domestic workers, we are talking about workers who are going from a poorer country to a richer country to provide services at a low cost. And so we are really talking again about subsidizing care work in the more developed countries or the richer countries by the labor force that goes as migrants to these countries as low cost. So why? So informalization exists. Why? Because there's a race to the bottom in terms of cost of labor. It is about reducing the cost of women's labor, and all the sisters before have talked about it. We are talking about garment workers who literally work so much overtime without written contracts. And these are workers who have to regularly go to the clinic and get a glucose drip before they can go to the factory because they're too weak and they are facing malnutrition. They're too weak to do the work needed. The other issue that some sisters have raised is the issue of young women workers. This is also a tendency in these informal sectors to have a preference for young women workers, which means after the age of, say, late 30s or 40, women workers do not have social security, do not have pension, and who takes care of them? They are either taken care of, if they're migrant workers, they're coming back to the original state, which then has to handle them, because the richer state that benefited from their labor is actually free of providing them of social security because they have been kicked out of their jobs. And this is happening in government also, like post 40 women, this is forced retirement. This is no longer 60, 65, whatever. This is forced retirement for women workers in sectors where social security is withheld from workers, either legally or illegally. I know that we have very little time. I just want to move to a couple of points to just end. One is that I think we really need to all fight for written contracts, because that is the heart of why employer-employee relationships are invisible. We have to figure out how to fight for written contracts. That's number one. Number two, and President Carmen mentioned this also, is living wage. We have to define whether or not we get it. That's a different issue, but it gives power to organizing. And we have done this in government. We do consumption surveys of workers across 8 Asian countries. And we have a way of developing a living wage benchmark, which we publish every 2 years. And the industry has now, after fighting it for many years, has accepted it as a benchmark. And they look forward to this benchmark every 2 years, and they have to explain why their wages are below that. They at least have to address the gap, whether or not they alleviate the gap. So I think at least defining living wage is really important across the sectors. That's number two. And the last one I will say, because a sister also brought up the issue of redistribution, what we say is, we have to see who is ultimately benefiting from the reduced cost of labor. In the world of fashion, it's the consumer countries that are really benefiting. These countries are benefiting because they are getting the tax dollars of the brands who are making a lot of profit of the workers. So we have to figure out who is profiting. And in that profit mode, we have to figure out how to redistribute some of that profit back to workers or to countries who are losing their income. We have to also think of our own countries where workers are leaving and coming back, say at the age of 40, being taken care of the state without any provision that the country that really benefited provided. So how do you redistribute wealth back? Is it a tax? What is it? And I think we have to, so these are some of the things that I think we can work towards. Thank you very much.
It is so hard to cut you off, and thank you so much for making that analysis of why informality. So speaking about informality, we have Sister Lorraine, president of StreetNet, and yesterday, Lorraine, we have been talking so much about care and informality these days because we're in the same hotel. So yesterday you said something really important. You said, think that every worker, every formal worker is a potential informal worker. So same question as Ananya, what are the current needs of the street vendors and what kind of possibilities for alliances do you see now that we are all talking and working and fighting to have care systems from a labor rights perspective and human rights perspective?
Thank you very much, Adriana, and thank you to the sisters who have presented before me. As Sister Ananya has just said, what I said about every formal worker being a potential informal worker is highly reflected in their presentation. The siege continues from both.
WhatsApp de la Katie acá.
There is a lot of informalization of formal jobs where workers barely have rights. Formal labor and informalization. So as the different sectors, we should be more united than divided by the different characteristics of our work. Knowing in unity there is strength. and in unity, we stand to build better and more sustainable strategies to uphold the sanctity of trade unions. Firstly, I will address the main reason why there is a siege against trade unions. I will take the example of my own country. We had a vibrant, active trade union in Zimbabwe, which stood as the best and the most representative social actor for change, for holding government to account, for holding all systems to account. But the system has been working on the trade unions globally to weaken them and thereby weaken the societal fiber for people to hold governments to account, for people to demand social and economic justice. Having said that, I will quickly go to what StreetNet is. StreetNet International is a global alliance of street vendors and market vendors. We have a presence in 58 countries in the Americas, Africa, Europe, and Asia. And all our members work either in street vending or in market vending. But because there is a high need for everyone to provide for their families on a daily basis in the absence of formal employment, you will find that there is an overlap. Others also work in homework, where they do a lot of production at home. And others may turn to domestic work to supplement their work. In my country, we call it piece jobs. Someone will come to your home, do your washing, do your cleaning, and it's described as a piece job, which is a derogatory term for work done. So we have a lot of overlaps. We have a lot of reasons to build alliances than to stand apart. Having said that, the street vendors, again, have got a lot of challenges, which also speak to issues of care. When we fall sick, because we are not covered by formal arrangements, we have to be taken care of at home. And mostly the burden of care rests on women. We saw it during the pandemic. Women played a role in taking care not only of their own families, it also extended to communities. And these were mostly informally employed women. And as we speak about that, we also think how being unable to provide sufficiently, not only for your family, but yourself as an individual, also affects people's minds. This speaks to mental health issues as well. This ropes in a lot of care work needed. We need professional care, which we cannot get. And this also speaks to domestic workers, dealing with a lot of pressure in other people's homes, solving other people's problems, and then going back to your own problems makes you a double punch bag. And who can take so many punches? This means there are a lot of mental health issues as well. We need a lot of psychosocial support, but there is no institution that clearly provides that clearly stands to say they are accountable for providing such. Even though we know very well, government should be a custodian for all those who cannot take care of themselves. The vulnerable groups are directly the responsibility of the government. This takes me, because I have so much little time, I have a muddled presentation. This takes me to saying, we cannot tackle issues of care and ignore the International Labour Organization Recommendation 204. I have a very good relationship with the recommendation, because whenever there are problems affecting street vendors, affecting other informal economy workers, I go back to the recommendation and say, the ILO has recognized the heavy presence of informal economy workers. We have to use and hinge on whatever instrument, be it recommendation or convention, even if it's not binding, but it means there was a need for it to be there. We have to push until it binds the member states. So when we look at the recommendation 204, there's conditions set for the provision of social protection to workers in the informal economy. And as I look at that, it also brings me to the stage of saying, we need strong alliances, not only as workers in the informal economy only, together with trade unions to push for the extension of universal social protection to everyone, all workers, be they formal or informal. Because without universal social protection, our conversation on care will be around a merry-go-round of talking about unpaid care work. I hate this unpaid thing. Why should anyone do unpaid work? Even as we look at the 5 R's, we also have to have opportunity for the care workers to define what redistribution means according to them. Recognition according to the workers affected. Reward according to the workers affected. Because if we do not define our own demands and our own aspirations, other people will define it for us. The more powerful people will define it for us. As trade unions, as workers' organizations, as workers' groups, we have to take the lead. And I'm rounding off, Adriana, to say we need to keep building the alliance, build it as even as we go to the International Labour Conference around the conversation about care. We have children as street vendors. They are exposed to so many dangers. I've told of a story which I keep telling. A baby died in Zimbabwe because an overzealous local authority officer thought the mother had left her tomatoes and ran off. But it was a baby. She covered the baby when she saw the officers approaching. But that officer thought, I'm going to squish and squash her tomatoes. Oh. He drove over the baby. That baby died. As an organization, we had to help and also offer psychosocial support. Such incidents should rope in governments unapologetically. They should take the lead in protecting and regularizing the work of the informal economy workers, not only regularizing the informal economy workers, but monitoring as well and controlling the legal or the law enforcement agents. Thank you. I'll come to that end.
Thank you so much. Like a powerful intervention and really centering social protection if we are really serious talking about care economy and care policies. Alexis, you are an unconditional long-time ally of domestic workers globally, and you also work with so many other occupations and sectors in the Americas. Same question, what are the views on the care needs of the different sectors that you work and support? And I know you work a lot with women. And what possibilities of alliances building do you see towards going to June ILC, since Lorraine mentioned that we really need to go together?
Wonderful. And that's a great question. And I'm so glad to go at the end because I can say ditto to what everyone before me has said, which makes this so much easier. So I'm coming from the Solidarity Center. The Solidarity Center is the largest US-based international labor cooperation organization. We are in association with the AFL-CIO, the US's largest labor confederation, and part of the global labor movement. And we're working in more than 70 countries across the global South. And the key principles that I would keep in mind when thinking about these care discussions are three. Number one, domestic worker organizing is at the vanguard of the global labor movement. Number two, organizing, freedom of association, and collective bargaining are vital for decent work for care workers. And number three, which flows from both of these, is that affected workers are not only the best equipped to propose solutions, but they're the most invested in demanding enforcement of labor rights, of social protection, of gender and racial equality for workers, and social inclusion for care workers. So going back to that first point, there has never been domestic worker organizing that didn't have as its starting place the simultaneous struggles for gender equality, for racial justice, for indigenous rights, for migrant worker rights, for LGBTI inclusion. Domestic worker organizing is the organizing that points the way forward for so much of the rest of the labor movement. And that's really important that we keep in mind that domestic worker organizing can mean union organizing. I think very often, depending on the context that we're in, very often they think there's the labor movement and then there's the domestic worker movement. And domestic worker movement is part of our labor movement. And then number two, no work is inherently incompatible with decent work. And no work is inherently protected as decent work because of skill level or formal education. What makes the difference is freedom of association, collective bargaining, and organizing for power led by those affected workers. As we've heard from our sisters, you can be in the public sector and still not have access to decent work. Workers in the public sector can face wage theft. Workers in the public sector face union busting and death threats for their work. You can be in the private sector. You can have a master's degree and still not have access to decent work. And you can be in an informalized sector. And through organizing and building power and making demands and holding authorities accountable, you can win access to decent work. And so we have seen, for example, garment workers in Central America who have organized for access to subsidized childcare from their employers, these global garment brands. And we have seen market vendors that have organized to bring their cities to the table and say, we want lighting for safety, we want you to pay for security guards, and we want access to parental leave. And so there is no work that is inherently separate from domestic work or inherently separate from decent work. And I always get very nervous when I'm in conversations where people talk about skilling up. I don't know anyone who does domestic work that is not doing skilled work. I don't know people in the informal economy who are not doing skilled work. I know people who are doing work that is undervalued and underpaid and excluded. And so it's really important to break down that kind of false dichotomy of skilled versus unskilled work, because domestic work is skilled work. Informal work can be skilled work. And the difference for decent work is the difference when we can organize, when there's freedom of association, and we can win those rights. I think one of the really important pieces for us to keep in mind as well is that the marginalization of poor women workers, especially women of color, migrant workers in the global South, it's not an accident of nature. And I'm not saying this for the first time on this panel. It is a deliberately built power structure. And because it was deliberately built by people, it means that it can be deliberately dismantled by people. And we are those people. And that is what we need to keep in mind when we're going to the ILC, the International Labor Conference in June. I think domestic workers showed us the way with Convention 189. In, 2011, domestic workers insisted that affected workers be the voice at the International Labor Organization. And they did so by working with national trade union confederations all around the world and ensuring that solutions were proposed and negotiated and won by affected workers. The global labor movement learned from this And we won Convention 190 to eliminate harassment and violence in the world of work by following the blueprint that domestic workers created. And I think as we go into the care debate, if we follow that blueprint that domestic workers created for Convention 189 and that we followed so successfully for 190, we see the path to victory. We have these high rates of ratification, not because all these governments around the world are so deeply invested in poor women workers' rights, but because workers take to the streets, they take to the governments, they do their sit-ins and they fight for it. And that's what we need to learn from and replicate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexis, for ending in this powerful way and connecting all the dots from the sisters, from the public, the private, informal garment sector. Unfortunately, we have to leave the room like in 5 minutes. Otherwise, we won't be granted at home for next year. So we literally have like 5 minutes, but we can take the conversation later. Okay, I'm going to take maybe the microphone. Alexis, do you mind? Your question needs to be framed in 30 seconds, and I'm going to take 3 questions, okay? 30 seconds, so then I can have 3 sisters asking a question, and then I can have somebody. Sarah?
Sarah is not going to ask a question.
Okay, okay. All right, thanks for the clarification.
Thank you. My name is Nazma. I'm from Bangladesh. Actually, the domestic worker issue already raised, but domestic work sector, a lot of children are also working at the house. So I think we need to add this. And in Bangladesh 2015, we have a national domestic workers policy, but last 9 years, there is no legislation or anything come out. And how do we make this pressure created to government, and as well as how to ratify the ILO Convention 89 for the domestic workers, because garment workers and domestic helper is nothing different, because all we treated like a as like informal workers, because I was also formal garment workers when I was 11 years old, and I know the reality. In COVID time, when the brand law cancellation, holding, suspension, and discount the order, a lot of our members went to domestic helper also. So we need how to strong platform and make better this kind of thing. Thank you, sister.
Thank you. The last one is going to be Sarah at the back. And it's, sorry, yeah, the microphone. You can pass it. And I've been told by logistics that we need to wrap up now, so Sarah is going to be the last one.
At the 31st Congress of Public Service International, there was a resolution in solidarity with the domestic workers worldwide. And PSI notes that domestic workers are often excluded from labor laws, including minimum wage, social protection, and working hour regulations, leaving them vulnerable to exploitation, abuse, and discrimination. They also note that International Labour Convention 189 on decent work for domestic workers provides a framework for the protection of domestic workers' rights and recognize them as workers with the same rights as other workers. At the same time, we note that only 36 countries have ratified that convention, and many countries have yet to adopt national legislations to protect domestic workers. Finally, we note that trade unions have a crucial role to play in advocating for the rights of domestic workers and ensuring their inclusion in the labor market. We want to reaffirm here today that PSI stands for building the social organization of care, of which domestic workers are a part. We note that ILO Convention 189 decent work for domestic workers promotes the adoption of national legislation that provides the rights of domestic workers. And we recommend working with and supporting unions and pro-unions organizations which aim to protect domestic workers and pushing for the widest possible ratification of C-189 convention. That is how PSI stands at the moment for domestic workers.
Thank you so much. I think that's a great way to end this. Thank you so much for the Solidarity in Action PSI for enacting this resolution to support the ratification of C-189 and to stand in solidarity with domestic workers. Because if we do not center decent work, we cannot really talk about care policies. Thank you so much, everyone. We can continue conversations. From the domestic workers global organized movement, we thank you so much, and we look forward to keep these discussions and going together to the ILC.
Una foto, Adriana, con todos los que están ahí, que se paren y aquí ustedes se ponen aquí y allá para acá me la toman. Sí, toda la sala, todas unidas, together.
Gracias,
Y ahí no la tomamos.
gracias a todos los compañeros y compañeras que están en el Zoom y en el Facebook, que nos acompañaron en esto, que es tan importante, que es la visibilización de las trabajadoras del hogar como trabajadoras de cuidado. Muchas gracias a todos, a todos.
Thank you very much to everyone for helping us and being part of our event. It means a lot, says Carmen Brites, President of IDWF. Thank you very much. And thank you to the communications team of IDWF. I'm going to close now the session.
Gracias, Sofía.
Ya lo traduzco.
Bye, Sofía. Well done.